Okay, Jade, what is tip number 4, please?
Tip number 4 is feedback must improve pupils' performance or learning, be timely, be acted on by pupils, and not create excessive workload. So again, this
is good. No, it's good.
So if I think about, I always hated marking, always. So I think this is my 15th year now that I'm going into as a teacher, and I absolutely love my job, but I hate marking, and I've always hated it. And that's because I think when I marked the first 5 years, or 10 years probably, of my career, feedback was marking. You only ever marked. It wasn't actually feedback. It was all written comments. I marked everything, as in I gave everything a mark, 6 out of 9, C, or whatever the grade was. And then wrote some comments on the bottom. It took ages. It was always massively delayed because it took me 2 weeks to get round to marking that pile of books. And you give the kids the books back, and you've just spent that last night, 3 hours the night before, sat marking, and they don't even read the comments, because actually they see, I got 8 out of 9. It doesn't matter what she said because I got 8 out of 9, or I got 4 out of 9. Oh my God, that's rubbish. I don't even want to see what she said. So, and I hated it for that reason, that it took so much time, and I just didn't feel that I was ever getting bang for my buck, I guess, in terms of workload. So, where now, I'll kind of say the changes that have come along in my practice and the practice at my school. So, first of all, I rarely give marks to pupils. That doesn't mean that I might record a mark in my mark book, but actually pupils, will do 3 kind of more summative assessments for our data captures at school, and I'll mark those properly to see how they're getting on. But now feedback is about improving. It's not saying how well they've done what they've done. And initially kids really struggle with that, and kids used to say, but miss, what have I got? I said, right, okay, let's say it's an essay in economics and it's a 25 mark essay, and I say to you, you got 22 out of 25. What does that mean? Because we've done loads of the work together, you've only just learnt the content, I've modelled a paragraph for you, then you've written it, it's not in time conditions, you haven't remembered it off by heart, you've used all your notes, so it's not really a true reflection anyway. And then even if it is a true reflection, even if you've done it as a timed essay, what does 22 out of 25 mean? It's not an A-level paper. It doesn't mean that you're going to get an A, because who knows what you'll have got in the rest of the paper. So it's trying to really show pupils that when you mark their work, the point is not to tell them how well they're doing, it's to give them feedback to improve. And then it doesn't matter how well you're doing, because we're all going to get better, essentially. So moving away from marks, only formative comments, massively feeding forward. So essentially giving feedback before they do the task, and by that we'll mean scaffolding, modelling, practice, etc. So the idea there is that pupils know how to complete the task to a good standard before they do it, where what I used to do, and now I'm like, I cannot believe I did this, is you let them write an essay, let's say, and then afterwards you tell them what was wrong with how they wrote the essay. And I think, why did I do that? That's obviously a ridiculous thing to do. So making sure that they know that beforehand, and then really moving towards either live marking, where you're marking the work and giving feedback as pupils are completing it and they're making the changes immediately, or live whole class feedback. So we'll often do a paragraph or part, maybe one question, and then I'll say, right, let's have a look, let's get some kids' works under the visualiser, what's really good about this, brilliant, add that into your work, how could we improve this work, excellent, if you've made the same mistake, can you improve that for me please? So it's all about that kind of instant feedback, so they're improving their work, that little bit of their work, but then obviously you hope that they improve the rest of the work that they were going to write with the feedback. Or if you are going to give delayed feedback, massively now we depend on whole class verbal feedback. So taking the work in, having a read, making a note of common misconceptions, common errors, really good bits of people's work that you want to share. And then I found that, because with the best will in the world, if you are marking 30 books, 30 pieces of work, and you're writing, the most you can write is 2 or 3 comments, isn't it? Because even if you're willing to spend your entire evening marking that set of work, the most you can write is 2 or 3 comments. Where actually, when you give whole class verbal feedback, the amount of the feedback and the quality of the feedback and the depth of the feedback that you can give is so much better, because you don't just have to say something like, you need to analyse this further. You can say, this is exactly what I mean by analysing further. This is an example of when we haven't analysed. This is an example of when we have analysed. Right, improve your work for me, please. So just massively more beneficial. And that's my feedback now, based on that tip.
Right, this is nice. So another biggie and a couple of things to dive into here. How does that play out in other subjects? Are there any subjects that find that model or approach more difficult than
so definitely
others?
I think English and I think modern foreign languages for similar reasons, in that obviously you are maybe more concerned with the quality of written work, but I think that's a misconception. The misconception on a whole class verbal feedback is that you're not picking up on things like spag because you're just giving kind of general stuff. You still should be. So you should still be taking a note of spag, and then if there's a pupil who, let's say, hasn't used capital letters, just write their name down. You don't have to write on their work, use capital letters, although obviously you could do. But I would just write Joe, capital letters, and then I would say to Joe in the next lesson, I haven't used capital letters, correct it for me now, please, before you start anything else. And again, if there's, spelling mistakes or anything like that. So I think that's really important. But what I would say is, again, this is all about teacher autonomy, and we now at my school have no requirement for written feedback, so you do not have to give written feedback. But if as a department you decide, actually there's these however many pieces a year, 6 pieces a year, where we want to give written individual feedback because we think in this case it's going to be really beneficial, then that's fine.
Interesting. I'm really interested in obviously you've got two perspectives here. You've got you as a teacher, but also as a senior leader. When I work with a lot of schools, and obviously I just chat about maths. You still get schools that have to take in books every 2 weeks or whatever. The teacher marks all the classwork, write all these comments, and you get things like good and well done and all this kind of stuff. And the kickback is always, well, SLT need evidence. They need evidence and so on and so forth. What's your stance on this? Are you not concerned about that as SLT?
One, what do you need evidence of? Because I don't want to see written marking in books, because I'm like, that is evidence that you are wasting your time and that actually you're probably not giving good quality feedback, because you've written 2 comments there, and unless you've combined that with verbal feedback, they're not that clear actually normally about how to improve their work. Use more description. Well, if the kid could have used more description, they would have done that. So unless it's, to me, written feedback is often poorer quality and not as clear what the pupil has to do to improve. What I want to see, and we do look at books, we don't take books in, but we look at books when we go, drop into lessons. What I want to see is that there's a good quantity of work, that there's good quality of work, that there's evidence of challenge. I want to see evidence of the things that we know are effective. So is there evidence of modelling? Is there evidence of self-assessment? Is there evidence of verbal feedback, which has then been acted upon? I don't have to see the teacher, writing verbal feedback in the margin, because if a kid's corrected their work, they've used feedback to correct that. So I think it's just thinking about what are you trying to evidence, and it's not necessarily written feedback, which would be the best evidence for that anyway. That was a bit of a rant.
Interesting. No, it's good. No, it's really good. And if I'm just going to take this opportunity to ask you a bit of a curveball question. It's related to what we're talking about, but not necessarily to feedback. It's about books. So, again, when I visit lots of schools, there's always different policies knocking around for what has to happen in books, right? So some schools, it's got to be lesson objectives written out, title, date, all this kind of thing. Now, whenever I talk about using tools of mass participation like mini whiteboards or ABC cards or whatever it may be, or lots of paired discussion, one of the kickbacks I often get is, well, we can't do that because SLT want to see evidence in books. And if they look through a book and they saw today, the only thing written down is like a worked example, but everything else has been done on mini whiteboards or discussion and so on, it'd be a problem. So where do you stand on that in terms of kind of what for you as SLT would you like to see in books? Is there a minimum you'd like to see there?
No.
How would that play out?
Honestly not bothered what I see in books. It was really sad that I think that pupils are denied those learning opportunities because it's not written down in a book. I can't believe that still happens. It's a really narrow view of how learning occurs, I think, and what. It astounds me that we'd have to provide written evidence of our pupils' learning. No, there's nothing I want to see in books, and actually we don't have books across the school. Some departments use folders, some do use books. It's completely up to them. I just think you want to see, not necessarily in books, but because it's more, I think, going into lessons and talking to pupils, you want to see evidence of learning, and by that I mean long-term learning. Because if you're looking at a book, what are you going to look at? Oh, it's neat. Well, okay, and I get that might show pride and it might show high expectations. Absolutely fine. They've done lots of written work. They've completed a worksheet. Well, what does that mean, that they've completed a worksheet? Do they actually understand it? They did that 4 weeks ago. Do they remember it? And actually, those things are much, much more important to look at when you're in lessons, and show much more evidence of learning, that you can talk to a child and they can say, at the moment we're learning this is what it is, it links to this that we've done in the past, a few weeks ago we did this, than the fact that they've got a nicely filled in table in their book, for example. So I think we've got to understand the difference between performance and learning. We've got to be brave and trust our teachers, I think, is the most important thing, and give them autonomy, and realise that learning isn't necessarily what they've written down in their books. Because what if they spent the whole lesson copying that off the board? How much learning have they done? They've got a lovely book with loads of notes in, but probably zero learning, I guess.
Sounds good.